When we think about the sea, many a times we just think about, going to Maracas Beach, we want to go to Tobago and enjoy the beautiful coral reef there, and we don't spend too much time thinking about protecting our waterways and our beaches and so forth. And especially as a small island developing state, knowing fully well that we're surrounded by water, this is very important and it should be top of mind in terms of the things that we can do to protect that which surrounds us. We are facing the effects of climate change and there's no argument about that whatsoever. But as individuals living on this twin island, it is our individual responsibility to seek out information and to ensure that we do what we can to protect our coastlines and so on. And it moves, it goes beyond just simply not leaving your litter on the beach and so forth, to actually taking some serious steps to advocate for the protection of our coastlines and so on. So to help me to unpack all of this, we have Dr. Anjani Ganase joining us this morning, and she is a research officer at the Coral Reef Ecology Institute of Marine Affairs. Good morning and welcome to AM Prime. So we are talking about protecting our coral reefs, we're talking about coastal protection, we're talking about the beautiful sea that surrounds us. What are the things that you think are most important for citizens to be aware of as we begin this conversation?
I think, first of all, as Prime Minister Mia Mottley put it, we are actually large ocean states, right? So we are responsible for more ocean than land, and that's true for Trinidad and Tobago. Our economic exclusion zone for Trinidad and Tobago is about 15 times the size of our combined land masses. So that's a lot of ocean that we are responsible for in terms of conservation, but also it's a lot of ocean that we as citizens do not know a lot about. So we can start from there, where we just need to start exploring our ocean backyard.
Yeah, and that is important, or against the backdrop of us being within the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. That period runs from 2021 to 2030. Could you tell us a bit more about what does that mean in a more practical sense? Because we see the Prime Minister of Barbados really being a strong advocate and so forth. But if we're honest with ourselves, the decade of ocean science for sustainable development might just simply fly over many of our heads.
Yeah, that's understandable. I think the first step for the decade of ocean is actually to start the process of understanding our oceans better. And what that means, it's the different components of the ocean decade, and a lot of it is based on sort of understanding the oceans, so ocean literacy, and understanding our connections with the ocean. What we do on land affects the sea, so there's a lot of work in building awareness of how we must do things like land planning or watershed management to protect and to conserve our oceans, because we benefit from our oceans from a lot of services that provide us with things like jobs, food, industry, trade. And so the Ocean Decade is focusing on making these jobs or these activities much more eco-friendly and sustainable in terms of how we manage our resources. The Ocean Decade is also important for developing tools in the blue economy, or the sustainable blue economy, because we do use our oceans a lot when it comes to fishing, for tourism, but it is a chance to remodel our system so that we know that our oceans can continue to serve us into the future.
Yeah, and as far as I've read, our economic exclusion zones might be 15 times the size of the land mass. And when we think about, as those things you mentioned, the ocean being a source of economic diversification, if we want to put it in that direction, because we can look to the ocean for many benefits. So it's not just about food. There are so many things that we can derive from the ocean. Do you think that we have sought to educate our population sufficiently to that end?
I think there's a lot of work to be done. Apart from just education, we need governance. Ocean governance needs to be developed. There are tools that we can work with international agencies to help us, but we also have existing policies and plans that need to be legislated and enforced. And I think we need to start there. So in order to be able to use our resources responsibility, we need a framework to guide us on that. And I think that's one of the biggest steps to having an ocean economy.
Yeah, and I actually read here that Trinidad and Tobago has a number of environmental policies and plans that have yet to be legislated and enforced. The draft Protected Areas Plan, the draft Buko Reef Marine Park Bill, the draft Fisheries Management Bill, the draft Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan, and all of these things are laid and we need them enacted, publicized and enforced. What do you think is the key back in this regard? Because if we're seeing these things as so important, we've made the first steps and good steps in that direction, but why haven't we gotten to the finish line?
I think that's where the connecting of the dots comes in. So a lot of people do not understand how these policies would actually help or grow businesses or grow industry and activities that we utilize with the ocean. And I think it's that awareness or lack of awareness rather and prioritization, right? So we have a lot of priority issues that we see over time and again on the news, spoken in government, things like crime, issues of the economy. And so the dots need to be connected of how we can resolve some of these issues. You can't expect the ocean to solve all the problems, but how the ocean and how we use the ocean can be solutions to existing and priority issues.
Gotcha. And one of the things that I know is really important to you and that you have presented on is the black sea urchins, and especially on the Tobago reefs. The question has been asked, when last have you seen them? And reports on the fate of sea urchins in the Red Sea following fatal disease in the Caribbean is something that you are well versed on. Would you mind telling us why these sea urchins are important or why should we be paying attention to this?
Yeah. I know sea urchins can be quite annoying for sea bathers, but they're very important grazers of algae. So on coral reefs, corals are the prominent habitat provider, and they need nice clean surfaces to grow from tiny little polyps to large colonies. And these sea urchins, they feed on the algae and they keep the reefs nice and clean. And they've done this job very well up until the 1980s, where we had our first die-off of these sea urchins, which resulted in up to 95% loss throughout the Caribbean, including Tobago. I do see them on occasion on the reef. You can find it, so you do see some recovery, but it's not to the scale that was described in the 1980s.
And as far as you are aware, are there any ongoing efforts, whether by private sector or public sector, to see a rehabilitation of such? Yes,
there is some research being done in the Caribbean. I believe there's work being done in Puerto Rico and the other islands to grow and rehabilitate sea urchins for release. But it is an ongoing struggle. So within the last 6 months, there was another outbreak of disease, which resulted in another die-off in the Greater Antilles. And so researchers are playing catch-up into finding out the culprit of the disease and trying to, at the same time, secure and the remaining sea urchins that do occur on the reef.
And thus far, in terms of, as you mentioned, research is being conducted. Have we been able, at least in the interim, to identify any of the sources of those diseases? And are there any things that we can do to help combat that issue?
Certainly. So they recently discovered that the most recent disease is a result of a tiny ciliate. So it's like a single cell organism with tiny hairs around it that allows it to swim through the water. So the ciliates can be pathogenic, so they can infect larger organisms, and that's what they realized was the source of the most recent um, outbreak of disease. But we still don't know what drives that outbreak, and we still are unsure of the disease that resulted in the die-off in the 1980s. So more research is being done to see if it's actually the same parasitic ciliate that they've discovered a couple months ago.
Got you. And of course, I read where, some of the issues of hurricanes, bleaching, and disease outbreaks have come parallel to the simple fact that humans have not been kind to the environment. We've seen pollution taking place, we've seen that exploitation and so forth. From where you sit, are we at the point of no return, or do you have confidence that we will see a right about turn?
I mean, there are days where you think that you're beyond the point of no return, but I think it's sort of I wouldn't be doing my job if there was no point of return. You are correct. There are a number of disturbances that are happening, which sort of limit the recovery of our marine ecosystems, of our wetlands, of our coral reefs. And the future of climate change projects that we're going to have these disturbances at a more severe intensity and a higher frequency. And so while there's a lot of catching up in terms of our management, there are still enough, there's a lot that we can do quite easily if there's willpower and if we prioritize our ocean systems. And so I do see and also the marine ecosystems are quite resilient. We know studies where marine protection of marine areas have resulted in significant improvements within a short time. So I do have a faith that, if we do implement certain policies and plans, that we can have some recovery and some resilience to future disturbances.
Yes, and sometimes all we can do is hold on to faith and trust that with the work that things will get done. Let me just say thank you so much for taking the time to help educate us on this subject. And of course, persons can find more on this going online, even searching your name, because you have put out information into the public domain in this sphere. And I just want to encourage you to continue to do this important work, because while many people are occupied by other things, we are seeing the importance of resuscitating the environment to allow for sea urchins and other marine life to flourish. So thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.